Under the late sunlight of Los Angeles, everything at Forrester Creations seemed polished, golden, and perfectly composed, but beneath that glitter, hearts were beginning to fracture in silence. Ivy stood in front of a mirror in one of the design rooms, her reflection layered over bolts of silk and sketches half-finished, yet her eyes were turned somewhere else, toward memory, toward a name that had once meant home. Liam. The name echoed softly, hauntingly, like the last note of a song she'd sworn she would never play again. There had been a time when his voice could ground her, when the touch of his hand was enough to erase every fear that came with ambition. But that time had ended in confusion, distance, and unfinished words. Years later, standing in the very building where dreams and reputations were sewn together, Ivy felt something inside her unravel the moment she heard that Liam was recovering, that he was back. The wound she'd buried so neatly beneath professionalism and poise began to throb again. She wasn't ready for the chaos of feeling, but emotion doesn't wait for permission. It simply floods, consuming whatever defenses remain. Electra saw it first. She always did. Electra possessed the kind of vision that could pierce through facades, the ability to see cracks before they split wide open. Her friendship with Ivy had always been an elegant mask for curiosity. She admired Ivy's sincerity, but she didn't believe in it. To Electra, feelings were raw material, useful only when shaped into strategy. The moment she noticed Ivy's distracted glance at the mention of Liam's name, Electra began weaving a plan that could rewrite her own place at Forrester, or better yet, inside Spencer's sphere of influence. For years, Electra had worked tirelessly in the shadows of others, styling the shows, advising the stars, whispering ideas that others took credit for. But now, she could feel her time coming. If she could control the narrative of Ivy and Liam's reunion, if she could present herself as the orchestrator of something poetic, a love reborn from ashes, she could make herself indispensable. What Electra didn't anticipate was how unpredictable emotion could be. Ivy was not the type to play games. When she thought of Liam, she didn't see status or opportunity. She saw the last person who ever made her believe in simplicity. Her heart wanted to remember him not as the man shaped by power, but as the man who once stood by her side in quiet moments, stripped of all the noise. But Los Angeles had changed Liam. Recovery had hardened him. The time away, the betrayals, the weight of legacy, it had all pressed him into a different form. When Liam re-entered the world of Forrester and Spencer, he didn't walk as the hopeful man Ivy remembered. He moved like someone carrying an invisible war inside his chest, where trust had been replaced by vigilance. And yet, when he saw Ivy again, the air changed. A flicker, fragile, dangerous, and real, crossed his face, a brief recognition of something pure that had survived despite everything. Electra saw that flicker and marked it like an investor watching market shifts. To her, every spark between Ivy and Liam was currency. She began feeding select pieces of information to the right ears, suggestions that Ivy's presence was bringing balance to Liam, that their reunion could become a narrative of emotional renewal that Forrester could capitalize on. She planted whispers that Spencer might benefit from being associated with a story of healing and forgiveness. Soon, rumors began to circulate that Electra was the creative force behind this reconnection project. Each glance, each accidental meeting between Ivy and Liam became part of Electra's script, turning human vulnerability into a public performance. But the danger of manipulating hearts is that they rarely follow choreography. Liam, still uncertain of his own emotions, began to feel the gravitational pull between truth and illusion. Ivy's eyes still held that quiet honesty that once made him believe in redemption, but now, every move felt like it was being watched, edited, retold by invisible hands. He felt the presence of Electra even when she wasn't in the room, her scent lingering in board meetings, her name on every project proposal, her influence stretching like silk threads that bound everyone to her design. For the first time, Liam realized he wasn't caught between two women. He was caught between two worlds. Ivy represented the possibility of peace, a world where love was small and sacred. Electra represented survival, Ambition sharpened into something intoxicating. As the weeks unfolded, the tension inside Forrester Creations became palpable. Ivy's quiet nature clashed with Elektra's electric confidence. Every interaction between them carried undercurrents of rivalry, wrapped in the language of friendship. Elektra praised Ivy in public, framing her as the emotional muse of Liam's transformation, but behind closed doors, she positioned herself as the visionary guiding that transformation. Ivy began to feel her name slipping out of her own story, as if she were becoming a side note in a narrative someone else was writing. She started to question her place, not only in Liam's life, but in her own career. Was she losing control, or had she never really had it? Liam, meanwhile, was fighting ghosts. His recovery had given him clarity, but not peace. The love he once shared with Ivy had been real, but it belonged to a version of himself that no longer existed. With Elektra, everything was new, unpredictable, and laced with danger. She challenged him, provoked him, made him feel alive in a way that frightened him. But it wasn't love, it was adrenaline, a temptation born from chaos. Still, the more he tried to resist, the deeper he sank into her gravity. She knew how to draw him close with intellect, how to speak in the language of power and redemption that appealed to his ego. Yet, when she smiled, there was always calculation behind her eyes. The story reached its breaking point when Liam was invited to co-sponsor Forrester's new international expansion campaign, a project that both Ivy and Elektra had been secretly vying to control. Ivy wanted to represent it as a story of authenticity, of artistry meeting legacy. Elektra saw it as her platform to cement her dominance, her way of stepping out from the wings into the spotlight. When the board announced that Liam's vote would determine who would lead the campaign, the air turned electric. Ivy withdrew into herself, terrified that her feelings for Liam might compromise her integrity. Elektra, on the other hand, moved in closer, whispering ideas of partnership and unity, trying to blur the lines between personal and professional. In the days leading up to the vote, everything at Forrester became a stage for quiet warfare. Sketches were leaked, rumors seeded. Old photos of Liam and Ivy resurfaced online in what appeared to be a tribute, though no one could trace who posted them. Elektra kept smiling, pretending shock, even as her plan unfolded exactly as she intended. But the closer she got to victory, the more dangerous the silence between her and Liam became. He began to sense the manipulation not just around him, but inside him. Elektra's words echoed in his mind long after she left the room, twisting his memories, making him question which emotions were truly his and which had been planted. On the eve of the vote, Ivy found herself alone again, sitting in the garden outside Forrester headquarters. The air was heavy, the scent of roses almost suffocating. She thought of the years she had spent trying to define herself apart from Liam, only to be pulled back into his orbit the moment he reappeared. She wondered if love was ever truly separate from ambition, or if both were just different ways of reaching for something we fear we'll never deserve. At that same moment, in another corner of the city, Elektra stood in front of her mirror, practicing her expression of shock for the next morning, how she would feign humility when the board announced her as the new creative director. But when the announcement came, everything broke differently. The board had chosen Ivy. Not because of her strategic plan, but because of the purity of her vision. Elektra smiled tightly in front of the cameras, her hand resting on Ivy's shoulder as if offering support, but her nails pressed just enough to draw blood. Liam watched from a distance, realizing in that instant how fragile his world had become. Ivy's win meant honesty had triumphed, but it also meant Elektra's defeat, and Elektra was not someone who accepted defeat quietly. As the celebrations faded, a darker current began to move beneath the surface. Documents started leaking. Anonymous emails arrived hinting at conflicts of interest between Ivy and Liam, suggesting that her promotion was secured not through merit, but through personal ties. The same media outlets that once praised her authenticity now questioned her integrity. Ivy's triumph curdled into suspicion, her peace shattered. Liam tried to protect her, but every word he spoke seemed to feed the narrative Elektra had already set in motion. She had lost the title, but she had won the war of perception. The tension climaxed one night when Ivy confronted Electra, not with anger, but with exhaustion. She wanted to know why. Why destroy what could have been friendship? Why turn every emotion into a tool? Electra's face softened for the first time. Perhaps she was tired too. Or perhaps she simply saw no reason to hide anymore. She told Ivy the truth, not out of remorse, but as revelation. Because sincerity doesn't survive here, she said. It just gets rewritten. Liam found out hours later that Electra had resigned from Forrester. She left no trace, no note, just silence, and yet her presence lingered like perfume in an empty room. Ivy, shaken but still standing, understood that victory in their world was never permanent. She had won, but she had been changed. Liam, standing beside her, realized that his love for her could never be what it once was. Too much had been twisted, exposed, and lost. He could only promise not to let anyone else write their story again. But in a city where power never sleeps, promises are as fragile as the light at dawn. Somewhere across Los Angeles, a new magazine issue went to print. Its cover featuring Liam, Ivy, and a headline Electra had ghostwritten weeks earlier. Love as legacy, the power of forgiveness. The image gleamed, beautiful and false, a monument to everything they had survived and everything they hadn't. And as the lights dimmed over Forrester that night, one question lingered like smoke rising from the ruins of desire. When love and ambition share the same heartbeat, can either ever truly survive the other? Or are they destined to destroy whatever they touch, again and again, until nothing remains but the echo of what once felt real? The revelation detonated like a silent explosion, rippling through every carefully constructed wall Liam had built between duty and desire. The glossy magazine that bore his own image, his face framed beside Ivy's, beneath a headline ghostwritten by Electra, was more than just a reminder of manipulation. It was proof that he had become a symbol in someone else's story. The moment he saw it, time slowed. His engagement ring to Hope weighed heavier than metal, and the image of Ivy beside him, the woman he'd once left behind in search of clarity, burned through every illusion he'd spent years protecting. The world might have seen a tale of love reborn, but Liam saw a lie too perfectly lit to be coincidence. And worse, he saw himself at its center. For days after the magazine's release, Liam couldn't think. Every sound felt distant, every conversation rehearsed. Hope moved through their shared space like sunlight trying to warm stone, talking about the wedding, the color palette, the guests, the future that everyone assumed was already written. But Liam's mind kept returning to Ivy, her eyes that night at the Forrester Gala, the way her voice trembled when she thanked him for believing in her even when the world doubted her. She had meant it. There was no performance in her gratitude. And yet, somehow, her truth had been twisted into a tool for someone else's ambition. He remembered the way Electra had smiled at the press conference, not with triumph, but with quiet satisfaction, as though the chaos that followed was part of her design. Electra's ghost lingered in every reflection, in every decision that followed. It wasn't just that she had manipulated events, it was that she had revealed something far uglier, something Liam could no longer ignore, that he was the kind of man who could be rewritten, rebranded, repurposed at the whim of others. And now, on the brink of another marriage, another vow, he wondered if he had truly ever chosen anything for himself. The night before the wedding, Hope sat at the edge of their bed, her dress laid out across the room like a promise too pure for the man who could no longer wear it. She spoke softly about starting over, about forgiveness, about how much they had endured. Liam nodded, but the words passed through him like wind through glass. He wanted to believe her, to step into the life she was offering, to convince himself that love could erase the weight of everything that came before. But deep down, he knew he wasn't stepping into a marriage. He was stepping into another story scripted by expectation, not choice. Outside, rain began to fall, a rare, quiet rain over Los Angeles, washing away the glitter of the city, leaving only its skeleton of steel and reflection. Liam watched it, seeing not the future he was supposed to embrace, but the ghosts of the choices he'd avoided. He saw Ivy's reflection, not in memory, but in truth, someone who had loved him without asking for control, without shaping him into a symbol. That realization hit him with a force that left no room for pretense. He couldn't go through with the wedding. Not to Hope. Not while the image of Ivy stood like an unspoken confession between him and the man he pretended to be. Morning came with cruel precision. The venue glowed in perfect harmony. Flowers, music, photographers, everything Hope had planned down to the smallest detail. Spencer and Forrester families gathered like kingdoms, sealing a treaty. The ceremony was supposed to be beautiful, the kind that repaired headlines and mended wounds. But as Liam stood at the altar, looking out across the faces, hearing the murmurs of guests, he felt the oxygen drain from the room. Hope smiled at him, radiant and certain, her hand trembling slightly as she waited for him to speak. And in that moment, everything inside him broke. He saw the magazine cover again, the artifice of love, the lie of perfection. He saw Ivy's tears when she tried to tell him that Forrester wasn't just fashion but survival, that ambition could corrupt even the purest emotion. He saw Electra's final smirk before disappearing, leaving behind the chaos she had predicted with eerie precision. And above all, he saw himself, a man constantly pulled between truth and illusion, always choosing the wrong side until there was nothing left to save. When the officiant asked the question, Liam's silence stretched longer than the room could bear. Hope's smile faltered, confusion flickering through her eyes, then fear. He opened his mouth, but the words came out as something raw and trembling. "I can't." The sound shattered the air. Gasps rippled across the hall, followed by whispers, camera shutters, disbelief. Hope's bouquet slipped from her hand and hit the marble floor, scattering petals like falling ash. Liam walked away. Not with anger, not with drama, just quiet conviction, like a man finally stepping out of a dream. Behind him, the whispers turned to headlines, the headlines to fury. Spencer Communications tried to control the damage. Forrester issued statements of personal matters. Hope locked herself away, her pain bleeding into silence. And Ivy, hearing the news from afar, felt her chest tighten, not from triumph, but from the hollow ache of inevitability. In the weeks that followed, Liam disappeared from the spotlight. No press, no appearances. Rumors spread. Some said he left Los Angeles, others claimed he was working anonymously on a project abroad. But the truth was simpler, sadder. He needed to understand who he was when no one was watching. Away from cameras, from family expectations, from women who loved him for fragments of who he could be, Liam began to strip himself bare. He walked along unfamiliar streets, thinking about Ivy's honesty, Hope's devotion, Electra's manipulation, and how all of it reflected pieces of himself. He wasn't angry anymore, he was awake. He saw now that every relationship had been an echo of the same question he'd never dared to ask. Was he capable of love that wasn't shaped by guilt or ambition? Ivy eventually found him, perhaps by fate, perhaps by instinct. Their meeting was quiet, accidental. No music, no speeches. Just two people standing in the aftermath of everything, looking at each other as if time had folded. She didn't ask him why he left the wedding. She didn't need to. The answer was in his eyes. The exhaustion, the relief, the clarity. They stood there, not as lovers reuniting, but as survivors of the same illusion. For the first time in years, Liam felt something close to peace. Not because the past was repaired, but because it no longer owned him. He told Ivy he needed to build something real, not for anyone.